Welcome back everybody to Gemology for Schmucks. Once again, my name is Peter Nelson and I'm here to guide you in everything that you need to know about gemstones. Last week we talked about some of the limitations that technology has in showing us the true color of gemstones. And this week we're going to follow that up with something that's interrelated and very important to be aware of when buying gemstones, especially in pictures, especially online. But it also applies if you're buying gemstones in person. So first we're going to talk about two fundamental things about light and how it applies to gemstones, and then we're going to talk about how that applies to buying gemstones. Should be pretty practical, let's get into it. So first let's look at two very important things about how light affects a gemstone. Number one is how intense is the light and what does that cause the stone to do? So when we're looking at gemstones, if you take this out into direct sunlight in the bright noonday, it's going to look fantastic. Most of the time, the sun will open up that stone and you're just going to fall in love with it. That is a trap, so please be careful about when you're taking stones out into bright light, especially direct sunlight, or the bright lights on a dealer's booth, because both of these are going to open up the color and make it very easy to love. What you need is some scrutiny, a pinch of that salt. So what are the ideal lighting conditions? Most of the time, dealers or brokers will take the stone into a place that has strong skylight. Now, skylight and daylight are not exactly the same. Skylight is a diffused light source, so you might go into something like an alley or a restaurant with a big old window, something like that. That way you get a lot of natural light, but you don't get that direct glare from the sun. Now, those of us who are unfortunate enough to go through high school remember the cruel lights of the fluorescent bulbs. But even though we felt they were very strong, in reality, the light coming from fluorescent bulbs is much weaker than natural daylight. So when evaluating stones, it's still the practice of dealers to take this into a diffused light source with strong skylight. In the northern hemisphere, we typically use the northern direction because it has the most intense light without having much glare. In the southern hemisphere, people typically use the southern-facing windows for the exact same reason. The light has more strength but with less glare. So these lighting conditions will allow you to see the true color of the stone without enhancing it too much like direct sunlight would. These types of strong light will do a couple of things. It'll show you the true color, yes, but it will also open up the stone and allow you to see certain inclusions that you might not see in a darker lighting setting. So this allows you to evaluate the stones more effectively. Again, we're going for beauty here, but you gotta see enough in order to evaluate the beauty in all natural conditions. Obviously, if you go at a stone with a microscope, you can see a lot of things that you wouldn't see with the natural eye or even with a loupe, but the majority of people are not going to be coming over and looking at your ring with a microscope. And if they want to, you can always tell them no. Consent is a thing. I said that dealers and brokers typically evaluate stones and buy stones using natural light, but the truth is that sunlight is fickle. At different times of day and different times of year, the sun is different. So we're talking about different intensity of light, but also different colors of light. If you look at the same stone in morning light, and then you look at it in noon light and in afternoon light going towards evening, these are all going to look differently. And if you think about the atmosphere, that makes a lot of sense, because if the sun has to punch through more atmosphere to get to your stone, of course certain wavelengths of light are going to be filtered out by whatever it has to pass through. And the same thing is true with different times of year. If you're talking about winter sun as opposed to summer sun, it's a very different color. I personally love fall and winter sun because the sun looks old, it looks a little bit tired, and it's much more gentle on my pasty skin. I feel like it's easier to take a nap in that kind of condition. Personal tastes. And also keep in mind that different areas of the world, if you're at a different latitude, the quality of light at that latitude is different. So somebody who's buying stones in Sri Lanka, which is in the tropics, is going to have very intense light with certain colorations. Somebody that's up in Canada or in the UK is much farther north, and so they have a different quality of light. So if the dealer buys a blue stone in Sri Lanka and then takes it back to one of these northern countries, the stone can look darker. And for this reason, when people are dealing with high-end stones, they need to take something called a comparison stone. If I'm in Canada or if I'm in London, then I know that this stone will look the right type of blue. And so I take that with me to Sri Lanka and I evaluate my blue sapphires using this comparison stone. If they look similar, I have an idea of what it's going to look like when it's back in Canada or the UK. Even the most experienced of dealers will tell you that comparison stones are essential for buying in these types of conditions. So we've already established that the sun is fickle. So what can we do about it? Well, as sciences want to do, standardize everything. So even though it's not preferable to sunlight, in order to be standardized, we use a fluorescent bulb, like this one. The important thing to keep in mind when you are using or buying one of these lamps is that they need to have the right color temperature. Color temperature is a scientific way of evaluating what color something is. And it particularly applies to light. So if you're dealing with warm light or cool light, those are nice terms for us to use in general. If you're talking about designing a party setting, maybe you don't want as much cool light. Candlelit dinner or wedding party. If you think about that, most of the time you think of warm lighting. It's much more cozy, it's much more gentle. And that warm color temperature is actually cooler than cool color temperature. Cool color temperatures are actually hotter because color temperature is defined as the ideal black body radiating metal. So typically it's like an iron bar or a tungsten bar that's heated up to a certain temperature. And when it's heated to that ridiculous temperature, it will glow. So the color that that object is going to radiate when it's heated to that temperature is this color temperature. So if it's 5,600 degrees Kelvin, that's the color temperature. If this bar was heated up to that temperature, it would radiate at something closer to white. If it was up in 6,000 or so, it would start to go blue. Because just as with fire, it's the blue that is much hotter than the orange and yellow. So for our lamps here, we typically use 5,000 to 6,100 degrees Kelvin. That's pretty close to noonday light. These bulbs are not as intense as daylight, but it gives us a standardized idea of what the color will be at that time of day anywhere in the world. The truth of the quality of light, you have to go outside to see, but that's okay. This is enough for the buying and selling purposes. Personally, I think this is amazing, because this is another situation where stones are telling us truths about our nature. Things that we overlook in the day-to-day. The color of light in different areas of the world is different, and that echoes the fact that the world is not flat, but is subject to changes in how the sun approaches the Earth. So in winter, your stone is going to look a certain way. In summer, it's going to look another way. During the morning, during the afternoon, they're going to look differently. And that's something else that buyers have to keep in mind. There's a concept called Purkinje Shift, or Purkinje Shift, depending on who you're talking to. But there was a scientist who found out that the rods and cones in your eye that are capable of perceiving color are more sensitive at certain intensities of light. So in the earlier morning and the evening, our eyes are more sensitive to shades of blue. So if you're buying sapphires and you're looking at them in the earlier morning or in the afternoon going towards evening, our eyes become more sensitive to the blue and it will enhance the blue in that stone, or at least our perception of that blue. So for blue sapphire dealers, they will typically look at stones more towards noon, when the stones will look at their worst. Yes, there's a lot of light, but there's less of that blue color that our eye is picking up. And the opposite is true with rubies. They're going to look best towards noon, because there's more of that yellow and that orange that enhances the red in the light. So if you're buying rubies, it's better to go earlier in the day or later in the day when there's less orange and yellow in the light. Science! So how does this help us in buying gemstones? A lot. Whether you're buying in person or online, it gives you a series of questions that you can ask about the photos that are being taken, or if you have them in your hand, where do you go in order to see these stones? If you're only hanging out in an office that has bright lights, and particularly colored lights, some of them are colored more blue if they're trying to sell sapphires. Some of them might be more yellow if they're trying to sell rubies and things like this. Make sure that you take them out of those lighting conditions into some other place so that you get a chance to see what this color actually will look like in real conditions. Ideally, you would like to see natural light but not in direct sunlight. So take it over to a window, move it around, and get a chance to see what it would look like in natural daylight. Try and shield the stone from the office lights if you can. Most brokers, if you will ask them, they'll happily turn off their office lights so that you can see only in natural light. They understand this is a part of the normal trade. Another thing that you will see people do to make sure that the stone is open and not too dark is they'll actually take the stone and they'll put it into the shadow a bit. Because if the stone is still open, even in the shadows and not in direct blasting light, then you're more likely to have a stone that is lively in all conditions. The color might be good, but how lively is the stone? The shadows can help you to see that. Ta-da! If you're shopping for stones using pictures through online brokers and things like that, then you want to make sure that you get photos or video or both that are in different lighting conditions. You can have them take pictures in natural daylight, in full sunlight, and also in diffused skylight, so in the shadows. You can also have them take them inside of their office. And by looking at the differences in those photos, it can help you get an idea of truly what does this stone look like. So as a quick recap, today we've been talking about light and how it impacts stones. How much light is going into the stone, what conditions are we lighting it with, and what colors are available inside of that light. Sunlight's going to change its colors and intensity depending on where you are in the world, what time of day it is, etc., etc. So it's important to try and standardize when you look at stones. When stones are being graded in the gem trade, we use a lamp that's typically between 5,000 and 6,000 degrees Kelvin. It's a standardized, typically like daylight color temperature, and that helps us to know generally what is the true color and give us confidence when buying. If you're buying on pictures, then make sure that you ask for multiple lighting conditions. That'll help you draw a line between what you think the true color will be of this stone. Ideal lighting conditions for brokers is using northern skylight, which is not direct sunlight, for those of us that are in the northern hemisphere, and those of you that are in the southern hemisphere, you want to use southern skylight because it has less glare, but still a lot of intensity. And as usual, I love having conversation with you, so if you have any questions or comments, please leave those in the comments section below. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, tell all of your friends, and until next time, bye-bye.